Welcome back, everyone. Tonight's story really happened in Japan, in the quiet mountain town of Takayama. At first glance, it's just another ancient shrine hidden deep in the forest, a place that has stood for over 400 years. But 3 years ago, something happened there that changed everything. The last priest died, the rituals stopped, and suddenly the shrine was no longer a place of protection. It became a prison, overflowing with restless souls. Stay until the end, because I'll reveal why locals still whisper about Tsukikage Renge, and why even today they warn, never go there at dusk. Haruto is, in many ways, an ordinary young man. At 26, he lives in Tokyo, surrounded by the bright lights of skyscrapers, crowded trains, and the constant hum of a city that never sleeps. By day, he does odd freelance jobs, portraits for a local magazine, product shots for a startup. But at night, he pursues his true passion, documenting places that time has forgotten, empty temples, rusting factories, and wooden schools swallowed by weeds. These are his subjects, silent witnesses to history. Photography has given Haruto purpose. His online followers admire his eye for haunting beauty, the way he frames broken bricks and crumbling doors into poetic compositions. For him, it's not about proving ghosts are real, it's about preserving memories. The lens is the bridge between his past and present. So when he heard whispers of Tsukikage Renge Shrine, the so-called prison of spirits, he saw not just a local legend, but a photographic opportunity. Other explorers had spoken of strange mists, of lanterns glowing without fire, of voices calling in the trees. To Haruto, this was not only eerie, it was irresistible. His plan was simple: hike to the shrine, set up his camera by golden hour, and capture the atmosphere just as the forest sank into dusk. A trip like countless others he had made before. Nothing unusual. That late October afternoon, he left Takayama's quiet streets at 4 o'clock sharp. His backpack held lenses, a tripod, extra batteries, and a flask of green tea. The town behind him was lively in its own way. Children walking home from school, shopkeepers closing shutters, the faint aroma of grilled skewers in the cooling air. He blended right in, just another traveller with a camera and a plan. The trailhead to the shrine lay at the edge of town. A faded wooden sign marked the path, its carved letters nearly erased by time. At first, everything was ordinary. Gravel crunched beneath his boots. The scent of cedar trees and damp earth filled the air. A breeze whispered over the mountainside, tugging at his jacket. He paused to take a quick photo of the trail's entrance. Something mundane, something to bookmark the journey. As he walked deeper into the forest, the path narrowed. Twigs brushed his sleeves, and the ground grew uneven. But this was nothing he hadn't encountered before. He focused on his breathing, on the steady rhythm of footsteps, on the anticipation of the photos to come. His thoughts wandered to how the images might look on his Instagram feed, the likes and comments they might draw. Everything felt grounded in the everyday, routine, almost comforting. Yet gradually, he noticed what was missing. No birdsong, no cicadas, not even the rustle of squirrels in the underbrush. For late autumn in the Japanese mountains, the silence was too complete. Haruto slowed, listening harder. Perhaps the season had driven animals into hiding. Perhaps. He brushed off the thought, telling himself he was being dramatic. But the quiet clung to him, thick and unnatural, like a heavy blanket laid across the forest. Half an hour later, he emerged at the shrine grounds. Here, the ordinary began to bend. Towering cedar trees framed the clearing like the columns of a cathedral. Their roots wound over stones, thick with moss. Stone lanterns lined the pathway, though many had toppled, their carved faces broken. The main hall rose ahead, a graceful wooden structure with a curved roof, its tiles sagging under years of neglect. Green moss spread like veins across its edges. And then there was the mist. Thin at first, it curled between trees and lanterns, catching the last light of day. But as Haruto stared, he felt it wasn't random. The mist seemed to choose what it revealed and what it concealed, drifting deliberately across his view. It blurred the corners of the shrine, veiling sections of the grounds as though shielding secrets from his eyes. He raised his camera instinctively. Through the viewfinder, the composition was perfect: stone, wood, and vapor framed in twilight. Beautiful, yes. But as he clicked the shutter, his heart quickened. The beauty here wasn't peaceful. It was fragile, dangerous. Haruto forced a smile, muttering to himself that this was what he came for. Strange or not, he was here to photograph it. Yet in the stillness, one thought echoed louder than any sound. The silence here is not peace. It is something else entirely. The first sign came quietly, almost too small to register. The sun had slipped low behind the mountains, turning the forest a dim shade of gold. Haruto, adjusting his camera strap, suddenly noticed his breath leaving his mouth in pale, smoky puffs. The temperature had dropped far too quickly. It was late October, yes, but not winter. Rationally, he told himself, of course it's colder at elevation. Mountain weather changes fast. He rubbed his hands together, forcing a chuckle, ignoring the chill crawling up his spine. Then he heard it. A whisper, thin but precise, threading through the silence of the cedar grove. At first, he thought it was wind sliding through branches, but the sound carried a shape, a word, his name. Haruto. He froze. The voice was soft, intimate, spoken not in a shout or an echo, but as though someone stood right beside him. And it was a voice he knew, his grandmother's. 5 years had passed since she died. She had been his greatest supporter, the one who gave him his first camera, who believed in his art when no one else did. Hearing her here, in this forsaken shrine, felt like the world tilting off its axis. His rational mind scrambled for an explanation. Acoustics, maybe. The mist distorting sound. A memory stirred by the eerie stillness. That had to be it, but his body knew better. The hair on his arms stood straight, his throat went dry. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the mist-shrouded grounds. Nothing. No one. Only stone lanterns leaning sideways and the vast trunks of cedar trees. The forest held its breath. Focus, he whispered to himself. He was a professional. Strange sounds, odd feelings. This came with the territory of exploring abandoned places. If he let nerves get the better of him, he'd miss the golden light. He steadied his camera, tried to laugh at himself, and stepped closer to the shrine's main building. That was when he saw the door. The shrine's wooden doors were heavy, weathered by centuries of rain and snow. He expected them to be shut, maybe even sealed. Yet one stood slightly ajar, tilted inward by just a few inches. The gap was black, a mouth swallowing the last daylight. Haruto frowned. Wind. Perhaps the wood had swollen or shifted, but the angle felt intentional, like someone had entered not long ago. He leaned closer, raising his camera to peek through the viewfinder. That was when the smell reached him. Incense. Sharp, smoky, unmistakable. The very scent used in funerals. For an instant, it stirred warmth, memories of sitting beside his grandmother at ceremonies, the soft clink of bells, her hand resting on his shoulder. But almost immediately, another odor followed. Sour, organic, unpleasant, not exactly rot, but something damp and decayed, strong enough to twist his stomach. He stepped back, grimacing, heartbeat drumming faster. Logic screamed at him, "Stay outside, stay in the open air." Yet another part of him, the part stirred by that familiar voice, pulled him forward. The door invited him. The smell beckoned and repelled at the same time, like a trap baited with memory. Haruto hovered at the threshold, camera heavy in his hands. He could almost imagine her there inside, waiting, smiling, urging him closer. A warmth of longing welled in his chest. What if it really was her? What if somehow the veil between worlds had thinned and she was reaching across it to speak? But fear gnawed at the edges of that hope. He shifted his weight, torn between reason and desire. He told himself, "It's only the wind, only your imagination." Yet a deeper, darker whisper inside suggested otherwise. What if it's not? The audience already knew. These weren't harmless coincidences. A sudden drop in temperature, a dead woman's voice, a half-open door, incense laced with decay. Each detail could be rationalized in isolation, but together they formed a pattern. They weren't chance. They were warning. They were lure. Haruto couldn't see it yet, but the trap had already sprung. Haruto steadied his camera, forcing his hands not to shake. The strange cold and the half-open shrine door had unsettled him. But photography was his anchor. If he just focused on the work, everything would make sense again. He framed the building in his viewfinder, adjusted the aperture, and pressed the shutter. The familiar click was oddly reassuring. But when the LCD screen lit up, his stomach clenched. There, faint, almost translucent, stood a figure in the corner of the image. A woman in traditional kimono, pale face turned toward the camera. Haruto blinked hard and looked up. The shrine grounds were empty. He checked the screen again. The figure was still there. He told himself it was an artifact, a trick of the mist, some strange refraction of light. Photographers loved accidents like this. They gave mood and mystery to an image. He rationalized it instantly. It's nothing more than atmosphere. Still, he felt heat flush his skin despite the freezing air. He tried another shot, this time pointing toward the lanterns lining the path. The shutter snapped, the screen lit, and now there were 3 figures. Their outlines faint but undeniable, standing among the toppled stones. His breath caught. He spun around in real space. Nothing. Only mist drifting between trees, only silence pressing against his ears. No footsteps, no voices. Yet in the images, they were there. Haruto's rational mind went to work. Maybe the sensor is malfunctioning. Maybe moisture is causing distortion. Mist can play tricks with light. He repeated these excuses like a mantra, but his heart knew better. He took another photo, almost against his will. The main hall this time, its roof heavy with moss. On the screen, dozens of faces stared back at him, arranged in rows as though waiting for him. The figures were sharper now, more distinct, their robes patterned, their eyes hollow. A shiver rattled through his bones. He hadn't seen them with his eyes, but the camera had. And worse, their numbers were growing. The mist thickened, swirling in unnatural patterns. coiling like ropes around the cedars. He lowered the camera to catch his breath, then pulled out his phone to distract himself. Relief at the glow of the screen lasted only a second. The display was scrambled, characters warped into symbols he didn't recognize. They resembled Japanese script, but wrong, twisted, curling into forms that made no sense. His phone, useless. His camera, showing him things that should not exist. Haruto muttered to himself, trying to rationalize. It's electronics, humidity, cold weather interfering with devices. But deep down, he knew the truth. The camera was not broken. It was revealing. Each shot pulled back a veil, each shutter click thinning the boundary between worlds. The repetition built a rhythm. Click, more figures. Click, more details. Click, more faces closer than before. Every time, the intensity increased. His professional instinct screamed to stop, but his obsession with capturing the extraordinary kept pushing his finger to the button. Through the lens, the shrine looked alive again, filled with people who had died centuries ago, trapped in the very place where he now stood. Their expressions were not calm. They were pleading, furious, desperate. He whispered, almost in prayer, "This isn't real." But the audience already knew. It was real, and it was getting worse. No one else was there to notice, no one to share the burden of what he was seeing. The town below would never believe a word without the photographs, but the photographs themselves were the danger. Each one was both proof and invitation, dragging the spirits closer, granting them presence. Haruto lowered the camera at last, trembling. His heart thundered, his breath visible in white bursts. He dared not take another picture, yet his fingers twitched with the instinct to document. It was the paradox of his life. To capture was to risk. To stop was to lose everything he came for. And still, from the corner of his eye, he thought he saw movement in the mist, shadows stretching like fingers, faces forming and dissolving. The line between lens and reality was blurring, and he was caught in the middle. The tension ratcheted up with each repeated event. The figures multiplied, the air grew colder, the mist coiled tighter. What had begun as small unsettling details, the cold breath, the single whisper, the faint silhouette, had escalated into a crescendo of signs no sane man could ignore. Yet Haruto clung to rationalizations even as the evidence screamed otherwise. The camera was no longer just a tool. It was a doorway. And with every press of the shutter, the doorway opened wider. Haruto had taken enough photos to know the danger was real. He lowered his camera, trembling, ready to leave. But the forest had changed. The trail he had walked only an hour earlier, the narrow path lined with cedar roots, was gone. Where there should have been a clear opening back into the woods, there was only mist, dense and impenetrable, standing like a wall. He turned in another direction, pacing quickly toward where he thought the path curved downhill. After 10 steps, he stumbled back into the shrine courtyard, the mossy lanterns leering at him. Panic clawed at his chest. He tried again, faster this time, running toward the opposite side. His breath came ragged, boots crunching against the damp earth. But after moments, he found himself standing in front of the same main hall, the same half-open door. It was impossible. The grounds had folded in on themselves, reshaping into a maze that rejected escape. That was when the voices began. At first, they were low whispers threading through the mist, a chorus of syllables he couldn't place. ancient Japanese dialects mixed with something harsher, older. The whispers circled him, multiplying, rising from every direction. His name punctuated the din, clear as a bell. Haruto! Haruto-san! Stay with us. The voices layered, some familiar, others alien. He swore he recognized his grandmother again, but now her tone was different, hungrier, less gentle. Another voice, a man's, roared from the mist, deep and booming. Your body is the key! Haruto's heart thundered. He spun around, but the mist shifted, thickening wherever he looked, forming shapes that dissolved as soon as he focused on them. Hands, faces, mouths opening wide in silent screams. He clutched his camera against his chest as though it might shield him, but it only betrayed him. The screen flickered on without him touching it, images scrolling one after another. With every frame, the spirits were closer, sharper, less like shadows, and more like living people pressing against invisible glass. Their eyes locked on him, hungry, desperate. The sound escalated into chaos, rustling robes, footsteps crunching dead leaves though no one was there, the hiss of breath at his neck though nothing touched him. He twisted around, gasping, trying to swat away the invisible presence that grazed his shoulder. The mist surged suddenly, collapsing inwards. It no longer drifted randomly. It moved with purpose, like a living organism closing around prey. Shapes coalesced, bodies emerging from vapor. For the first time, Haruto saw them without his lens. Dozens of figures in tattered kimonos stepped forward, their skin pale and wet like river clay, their eyes sunken black voids. Some bore burns that never healed, their flesh scarred from centuries-old fires. Others carried wounds that bled without end, slashes across throats, arrows through chests, bones jutting out beneath translucent skin. They were no longer faint suggestions. They were whole. One stepped closer, dragging its leg with a bone-splitting crack. Its mouth opened, and from it spilled not words but a shriek so high-pitched it pierced his skull. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, tears blurring his vision. More voices joined, overlapping in a storm of need. We've waited too long. Your body will carry us. Open the door. Let us out. Haruto stumbled back, colliding with a toppled lantern. Pain flared in his spine, but terror drove him on. He tried to run, but the spirits were everywhere, circling, their forms moving faster now. One rushed past his side, and though it never touched him, his skin burned cold as if ice water had been poured over him. His breathing turned ragged, his legs weak. He was no longer a photographer documenting the unknown. He was prey, hunted in the mist. The shrine had trapped him, reshaped the world so there was no exit. He shouted into the emptiness, "Leave me alone!" His voice cracked, swallowed by the roar of whispers. But the spirits didn't stop. They pressed closer, their forms flickering between solid and spectral, their fingers stretching longer, curling like claws. One reached for his chest, and for an instant, he felt its hand sink through skin and bone, gripping his heart. A scream ripped from his throat as his vision blurred white. He staggered forward, desperate, tripping over roots, slamming into the wooden steps of the shrine. The half-open door loomed ahead. From inside, the incense reek grew stronger, mixed now with rot so overpowering it made him gag. The whispers swelled louder behind him, urging him to step through, to surrender. But instinct screamed the truth. Going inside meant never leaving. Haruto spun away, gasping, pressing his back to the shrine wall. The spirits encircled him fully now, their mouths chanting words that made no human sense, syllables that vibrated inside his skull like thunder. His camera flickered again, showing him his own reflection in the lens. Except dozens of hands were gripping his shoulders, his arms, his face, though in reality, nothing was there. His legs buckled. He dropped to his knees, clutching the camera so hard, his fingers went numb. For the first time, a single thought shattered through his panic. I can't fight this. I can't run. I'm powerless. And for a moment, he believed he would die here, consumed by the endless hunger of the shrine. Haruto staggered through the swirling mist, lungs burning, heart pounding as the chorus of voices pressed in on every side. He had tried to run, he had tried to fight, but the shrine twisted space, turning every path back into itself. The spirits were everywhere, faces in vapor, whispers in his skull, hands grazing his skin though nothing visible touched him. He was out of options, and then, from somewhere deep in his memory, came a fragment of childhood, his grandmother's voice again. Not the hungry imitation from earlier, but the true memory of her sitting beside him, teaching him Buddhist prayers. Words he hadn't spoken in years surfaced like a lifeline. Desperate, Haruto pressed his palms together and whispered the verses, stumbling over syllables but forcing them out. The effect was immediate. The mist buckled, recoiling like a living thing burned by fire. The voices shrieked in fury, the sound rising until it rattled his bones. For the first time since sunset, the spirits faltered. Seizing the moment, Haruto stumbled forward, drawn by instinct rather than logic. His camera swung against his chest, still ice cold, but for once he didn't look at its screen. He just ran, chanting under his breath, following a path he couldn't see but somehow felt. That was when he saw them, the cedar trees. A cluster of giants, older than the shrine itself, their trunks wider than cars, their roots coiling like veins into the earth. The mist swirled thickly at the boundary, but within the circle of trees, the air looked clearer, darker, untouched. Symbols were carved into one of the trunks, half erased by centuries of weather, yet faintly glowing as if some invisible force still charged them. Haruto stumbled into the grove, and the change was instant. The pressure on his chest lifted, the whispers muffled, fading into background noise as though he had pressed his ears under water. The spirit stopped at the invisible line, writhing and twisting, but unable to cross. He collapsed to his knees, sucking in air, trembling with relief. For the first time since entering the shrine grounds, he felt something close to safety. His phone flickered back to life, its screen glowing normally again. The battery level read 62%, the clock correct, but still, there was no signal. His hands shook as he clutched it, torn between hope and dread. He dared to glance at his camera, and there, on the LCD screen, he saw something that froze his blood colder than the spirits had. A figure stood among the crowd of ghosts just outside the cedar circle. Unlike the others, it wore modern clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, a backpack. The face was blurry at first, but as Haruto zoomed in, the features sharpened into someone he recognized. Riku, the missing photographer, the one the online forums had spoken of, who had vanished 3 months earlier. Search parties had combed these woods and found nothing. Yet here he was, or rather, his spirit, standing trapped among the ancient dead. Haruto's breath came in short gasps. No, it can't be. But then, through the camera's speaker, came a sound, faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. Haruto. It wasn't like the other voices. It wasn't hungry or manipulative. It was urgent, tired, still carrying the cadence of the living. Haruto swallowed hard, lifting the camera closer. Riku! The figure seemed to nod, though the movement was jagged, caught between frames. The voice came again, fragmented but clear enough. The camera. It's the key, but also the trap. Don't keep shooting. Delete them. Delete everything. Haruto's heart stuttered. The very tool that defined his life, that had built his career, was also the weapon the spirits were using to reach him. Every image captured was a door widened, a chain broken. And unless he destroyed them, he would meet the same fate as Riku, forever imprisoned here, feeding the swarm. The weight of it crushed him. His photos weren't just art anymore. They were evidence, proof of a supernatural realm no one believed in. Deleting them would mean losing what could be the most significant images ever taken. Proof of life beyond death. Proof that could change the world. But looking at Riku, eyes hollow, body half dissolved into mist, Haruto understood the choice. Proof meant nothing if he wasn't alive to share it. Proof meant nothing if it turned him into another prisoner of Tsukikage Renge. Tears welled in his eyes. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the camera. Outside the circle, the spirits raged, their mouths opening wider, their whispers shifting into screams. They knew what he was considering. They could feel their hold loosening. He clutched the camera tighter, thumb hovering over the delete button. Riku's voice, faint and breaking, urged him, now, before it's too late. Haruto inhaled sharply, the air of the cedar grove cold but clean. He had survived, barely. He had a way out. But even here, in this fragile sanctuary, the scars of what he'd seen clung to him. The voices would never leave his mind. The images of hollow faces and reaching hands were burned into his memory, deeper than any photograph. He pressed the button. Haruto's hands shook so hard, the camera nearly slipped from his frozen grip. The cedar grove groaned under the weight of the storm. The mist was shrieking, the shrine walls rattled, the ground itself quivered. All around him, the spirits pressed closer, their faces twisting in fury, their hollow eyes fixed on the device in his trembling hands. He stared at the LCD screen, at the gallery of images that had once thrilled him with the promise of fame and proof. Now those same photographs were shackles. Each picture was a keyhole, each shutter press a widening crack in the veil. And in that chaos, something broke through, a flood of visions, memories that weren't his own. The spirits, bound for centuries, poured their history into his skull. He staggered, clutching his temples, the images crashing over him in waves. He saw the shrine's origin. Long ago, villagers carried the restless dead here, binding them with rope and chant. Victims of violence, fire, betrayal, and sudden death, souls who could not move on, were imprisoned within these grounds. The shrine was never a place of worship. It was a cell, a spiritual oubliette, where the unwanted dead were sealed away, not set free. One vision, a woman with her hair scorched, eyes wide, screaming as flames consumed her village. Her charred body was dragged to the shrine. Priests performed their rites not to console her, but to suppress her, locking her fury inside the cedar grove. Another vision, a traveler struck down by bandits on the mountain road. His killers never punished, his cries for justice unanswered. His ghost howled, rattling windows at night, until priests subdued him, binding him in chants of iron syllables. His rage was never resolved, only chained. Haruto gasped as more images surged. Drowned children carried from rivers, soldiers cut down on battlefields, farmers buried under landslides, each one stolen from life suddenly, violently. None were comforted, none released. They were crammed into the shrine's prison, stacked upon one another like corpses beneath the floorboards of time. The priests had kept them pacified for centuries, their daily rituals dulling the hunger, damping the rage. But when the last priest died, the chants stopped. The prison locks rusted open, and Haruto's camera, modern, precise, merciless, was the tool that gave them visibility again. The device had not created them, it had simply revealed them. And in revealing them, it gave them a way out. Every earlier clue now fell into place. The silence in the forest, nature itself recoiling from the weight of trapped spirits. The sudden cold breath, air sucked thin by presences not meant to linger. The whisper of his grandmother, spirits baiting him with memory and trust. The half-open door, their invitation, a lure dressed as opportunity. The scent of incense and rot, their ritual binding mixed with centuries of decay. It all made sense now. He hadn't been documenting ruins. He had been prying open a wound that was never meant to heal. The spirits shrieked, their overlapping cries almost coherent. Keep the images, show the world. Let us through. Your body will carry us. Haruto's chest heaved. The choice lay bare before him. He could hold on to the photos, the most powerful proof of the supernatural ever captured. Proof that could make him famous, reshape history, redefine death. Or he could delete them, sacrificing his life's work, severing the bridge and shutting the prison door once more. His thumb hovered over the button. His mind screamed. His body froze. His soul trembled. And then he remembered Riku, the other photographer, the one already lost to the shrine. His blurred face had appeared in the images, a warning, a plea. Delete them, Haruto pressed. The first photo vanished. The grove shook violently, a collective howl ripping through the mist. Frost crawled up the cedar trunks, splitting bark with gunshot cracks. He pressed again. Another gone. The ground lurched under his knees, the shrine beams groaning as if about to snap. He pressed again and again, each deletion synced with his hammering heart. The rhythm became a countdown. 40 photos left, 39, 38, each one pulling screams from the spirits, each one dimming their outlines. The mist surged, slamming against the barrier of the cedar circle like a wave against stone. Shards of icy vapor flew at his face, slicing his skin. His breath puffed white, his lips turning blue. But still, his thumb pressed. 30, 25, 20. The chorus fractured into panic. Some spirits begged now, their hollow eyes shimmering with tears. Don't abandon us! Others cursed him, spitting rage that burned like acid in his mind. Yet all of them weakened with each file erased. 10, 9, 8. Haruto's vision blurred, his fingers nearly numb. The camera felt like ice fused to his skin. His ears rang with screams. His chest rattled with every breath. But he pressed on. 3, 2, 1. He deleted the last image. The effect was instant and catastrophic. The mist tore apart in a single explosion of wind. The grove filled with the thunder of splitting wood as the shrine trembled, then stilled. The voices cut off mid-scream, leaving only the echo of Haruto's ragged breathing. Frost shattered from the trees like glass falling from windows. And then, silence. Not the suffocating silence from before, but natural silence. A bird chirped faintly in the distance. Wind whispered through cedar branches. The world had returned. Haruto collapsed onto the ground, the camera slipping from his hands. Its memory was empty. His heart was still racing, but the storm was over. The ghosts were gone, bound again in their prison, denied their escape. Haruto had survived, but the knowledge he now carried was heavier than any camera. He knew the truth of Tsukikage Renge. He knew what had been locked there, and why. He knew that some places were never meant to be documented, because every act of looking, every act of capturing, was also an act of release. The fame he once craved felt meaningless. The proof he once sought was erased. All that remained was the scar of knowing, and the understanding that survival had come at the cost of sacrifice. He had traded glory for life, and deep in his bones he understood. It was the only choice. Haruto stumbled out of the forest near midnight, shaking with exhaustion. His camera memory was empty, the proof gone, but he was alive. The next morning, he reported the shrine's location to police, warning it was dangerous. They seemed doubtful, yet he knew he had done what mattered, preventing others from entering. Back in Tokyo, life resumed, but Haruto was no longer the same. He noticed chills in ordinary rooms, shadows flickering at the edge of vision, a weight in old places no one else felt. The shrine had left its mark. He never returned to Tsukikage Renge, and on his blog he quietly urged explorers to stay away. Some photos, he realized, are too costly to take. So what do you think? If you held that camera, would you have kept the proof or deleted everything to survive? In Japan, legends speak of Goryo, restless spirits bound to shrines not for worship, but imprisonment. Rituals kept them locked away. Without them, their hunger grows. Haruto's ordeal reminds us why such warnings exist. Don't forget to comment with your own eerie experiences, like this video, and subscribe for the next chilling story. Some doors are meant to stay closed, especially when your camera is the key.